The words came out of my son's mouth so casually that for a moment I thought I had misheard him. We were standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had raised him, fixed his school lunches, and watched him grow into a man. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He just said it like it was a simple fact. "Dad, you're becoming a burden." A few minutes later, he picked up his bag, walked out the door, and drove off to stay with his in-laws. The house fell quiet after that. But the next morning, when he came back and looked at me standing in the yard, something on his face changed, and he suddenly went completely still. I was holding a shovel, not because I planned to scare him. I'd been digging in the small patch of dirt beside the fence, the same spot where my late wife, Linda, used to plant tomatoes every spring. "Dad," he said slowly. His voice sounded different now, careful. I leaned on the shovel and looked at him across the yard. "Morning, Daniel." He swallowed and glanced toward the hole in the dirt. "What are you doing?" "Planting something," I said. Figured it was about time. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable like a teenager caught doing something wrong. Daniel hadn't looked comfortable around me in months. I raised that boy in Cleveland, Ohio. Worked 37 years at the steel plant, long shifts, overtime, missed holidays. I did it so he could have a life that didn't smell like metal and furnace smoke. And yesterday, he called me a burden in my own kitchen. He rubbed the back of his neck. "About yesterday, I was frustrated." "Were you?" "Yes. You seemed pretty calm for a frustrated man." That shut him up. The cold March wind moved through the yard, rattling the loose boards on the fence. Daniel glanced at the house. "You didn't answer your phone last night." I didn't feel like talking. "Well, Amanda's parents thought it might be best if I cooled off there for the night." I gave a small nod. "Must be nice having another house to run to." His jaw tightened. "You're twisting this." "No," I said quietly. "You said what you meant." He looked at the dirt again. Then he noticed something. The open trunk of my old pickup truck. Inside were boxes, clothes, tools, a suitcase. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Dad, why are your things packed?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pushed the shovel into the soil and wiped my hands slowly on my jeans. "I figured something out last night," I said. "What?" I looked straight at him. "If I'm such a burden, I won't stay where I'm not wanted." Daniel went pale. "Wait, what are you talking about?" Just then, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the quiet street and stopped in front of the house. Daniel turned toward it, confused. "Why is there a cop here?" The officer stepped out and started walking up our driveway. And when Daniel realized who the officer was looking at, his face changed completely. Daniel's face changed completely. "Dad, what did you do?" The officer walked up the driveway with the slow, steady steps of a man who already knew the situation. "Morning," he said, nodding to me first. "Mr. Harris." "Morning, Officer Bennett." Daniel looked between us. "What the hell's going on?" Officer Bennett glanced at him, calm and professional. "You Daniel Harris?" "Yes." The officer nodded once. "Your father asked for a civil standby this morning." Daniel blinked. "A what?" "It means I'm here to make sure things stay calm while he gathers his belongings and leaves the property." Daniel stared at him like he'd been slapped. "Leaves the property?" he repeated. Then he looked at me. "Dad, this is your house." I let out a slow breath. "Not anymore." Silence dropped over the yard. Daniel's mouth opened slightly. "What do you mean?" "I signed it over to you last year, remember?" I said quietly. "You said it would make things easier for taxes and insurance." His face tightened. "That's not what this is about." "No," I said, "but it does make one thing very clear." Officer Bennett shifted his weight but stayed quiet. Daniel stepped closer to me. "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" "Yes," he snapped. "You called the police because of an argument?" "I called them because I'm leaving." His eyes flicked to the packed truck again. The suitcase, the boxes, the old toolbox he used to play with when he was 10 years old. I saw something uneasy pass across his face. "You don't have to do this," he said. I looked at him carefully. "I know." The wind moved through the yard again. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel sighed heavily. "Look, I didn't mean what I said. You said I was a burden. I was stressed. You said it twice." His shoulders stiffened. "Dad, Amanda's parents keep asking why you're still living here. They think—" "I know exactly what they think." He looked embarrassed now. "They think I should be in assisted living or something." I gave a small nod. "That about right. But I never said that." "No," I replied quietly. "You just let them say it." Daniel didn't answer. Officer Bennett cleared his throat softly but stayed back. I walked past Daniel and lifted the first box into the truck. He turned quickly. "Dad, stop." I set the box down in the truck bed. "I'm 68 years old, Daniel. I worked my whole life for this family." "I know that. I raised you after your mother died." His eyes dropped to the ground. "I know. I gave that boy everything I had." My voice stayed calm, but my chest felt tight. Daniel rubbed his face. "Where are you even going?" I closed the tailgate of the truck. "That's the interesting part." He frowned. "What does that mean?" Before I could answer, a second car turned onto the street and pulled up behind the police cruiser. A black sedan. Daniel watched it stop. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out holding a thin folder. Daniel looked confused. "Who is that?" I recognized him immediately. "Mr. Callahan," I said. The man nodded politely as he walked toward us. Daniel's confusion turned into something darker. "Dad." I looked straight at my son. "He's my lawyer." Daniel's face slowly drained of color. And when Mr. Callahan opened that folder and pulled out the documents, Daniel suddenly looked terrified. Daniel's face slowly drained of color. "Dad, why is your lawyer here?" Mr. Callahan reached us and offered a small, professional nod. "Good morning, Mr. Harris." "Morning." Daniel stepped forward immediately. "What is this about?" The lawyer looked at him calmly. "Daniel Harris?" "Yes. My name is Thomas Callahan. I represent your father." Daniel glanced at me again, his voice tightening. "Represent him for what?" Mr. Callahan opened the folder and removed several papers. "Your father asked me to deliver these documents this morning while Officer Bennett is present." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Documents about what?" I crossed my arms and watched him. Mr. Callahan held out the first page. "Your father is formally terminating the family cohabitation agreement that allowed him to reside in this property." Daniel stared at him. "What?" "You became the legal owner of the home last year," the lawyer continued calmly. "However, there was a signed agreement stating your father could remain here permanently." Daniel looked at me sharply. "You never said anything about that." "I didn't need to." Mr. Callahan continued. "As of this morning, Mr. Robert Harris has voluntarily ended that agreement." Daniel blinked, confused. "Why would he do that?" I answered before the lawyer could. "Because yesterday you made it clear I'm not welcome here." "That's not what I meant." "You said I was a burden." "I was angry." "You sounded pretty certain." Daniel dragged his hands through his hair. "Dad, this is insane. You're blowing up the whole family over one sentence." "No," I said quietly. "I'm reacting to the truth." Mr. Callahan slid another document from the folder. "There is also a second matter." Daniel looked at the papers nervously. "What now?" "The financial support contract." Daniel froze. The color drained even further from his face. "What contract?" I looked at him carefully. "You remember the business loan?" His eyes widened slightly. "That was years ago." "Yes," I said. 5 years earlier, Daniel had come to me desperate. He wanted to open his auto repair shop outside Cleveland. The bank said no, too risky, too new. I used my retirement savings to help him start it, but I didn't just hand him the money. I made him sign a contract. Daniel looked at Mr. Callahan slowly. "You're not serious." The lawyer placed the document in front of him. "According to this agreement, your father holds controlling interest in the property used for the repair shop." Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. What? You signed these papers in 2021. Daniel grabbed the document and read quickly. His hands began to shake. No, this was just collateral. Temporary. I shook my head slowly. It was never temporary. Daniel looked up at me, panic starting to spread in his eyes. You wouldn't actually do this. Mr. Callahan spoke calmly. Your father is exercising his legal right to review the business assets this week. Daniel's breathing changed. What does that mean? The lawyer closed the folder. It means the ownership structure of the shop may be changing. Daniel stared at me. For the first time since he was a little boy, I saw real fear in his eyes. Dad, you can't take my shop. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said something that made his face go completely pale. Yesterday, you said I was a burden. I paused. Today, you're about to learn exactly how much weight I was carrying for you. Daniel took a step back, like the ground had shifted under him. And then his phone rang. He looked down at the screen. His wife, Amanda. He answered. Yeah? There was silence while he listened. Then Daniel's eyes slowly widened in horror. What do you mean the shop is locked? He turned toward me slowly. Dad, what did you do? Daniel stared at me, his phone still pressed to his ear. Dad, what did you do? I didn't answer right away. He turned away from us, pacing across the driveway while Amanda's voice spilled through the phone loud enough for all of us to hear. What do you mean the police are there? He snapped. A pause. What do you mean closed for inspection? His shoulders stiffened. The city never inspects on a Tuesday. He stopped pacing and looked straight at me. You called them. I held his stare calmly. I made a phone call this morning. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. Amanda was still talking, panicked. Daniel, what's going on? He swallowed hard. I'll call you back. He ended the call and shoved the phone into his pocket. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then his voice came out tight and low. You reported my shop. I requested an inspection. You shut my business down. No, I said quietly. The city did that. Daniel let out a humorless laugh. Are you serious right now? I didn't raise my voice. That garage hasn't passed a proper safety inspection in 3 years. That's normal. You've got oil drums sitting behind the building and electrical wiring from the 90s. He stepped toward me angrily. You're trying to ruin me. Officer Bennett shifted slightly but stayed silent. I'm trying to show you something, I said. Daniel's eyes burned. What? What happens when support disappears? The wind moved through the yard again. He looked like he wanted to explode. You're punishing me. No. Yes, you are. You already punished me yesterday, I said quietly. That stopped him for a moment. His breathing slowed. You're my father. I know. You're supposed to help me. I have, I said. I looked at the house behind him. The same house where he took his first steps in the living room, where Linda used to sing while cooking dinner. I helped you for 40 years. Daniel rubbed his face hard. This is insane. Mr. Callahan spoke calmly beside us. The inspection will likely last several days. Daniel looked at him sharply. Days? Possibly longer, depending on the violations found. Daniel looked back at me, panic creeping into his voice now. My mechanics can't work. Cars are inside the garage. Customers, I know. You're going to destroy my reputation. I held his gaze. Yesterday, you said I was dead weight. He looked away. That's not what You said it. His jaw tightened again. Then something darker crossed his face. You know what? He muttered. What? Maybe you are becoming a burden. The words hung in the cold air. Officer Bennett glanced at him sharply. I didn't react. I just nodded once. Thank you for being honest. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. His eyes followed the movement. What's that? I handed it to him. Open it. He hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a single document. He scanned the page quickly. Then his entire body went still. Dad, His voice came out barely above a whisper. No. Mr. Callahan adjusted his glasses. That is the official notice of asset withdrawal. Daniel looked up slowly. You liquidated the investment account. I nodded. That account funded the shop's operating expenses. His voice cracked. Payroll. Yes. Supplies. Yes. Insurance. Yes. Daniel looked like he might collapse. You emptied it. I moved it. To where? I looked at him calmly. Somewhere it will no longer carry you. Daniel's breathing turned uneven. You can't just cut me off like that. I tilted my head slightly. Yesterday you told me exactly what I was to you. He stared at the paper in his shaking hands. The yard had gone completely silent. Then Daniel whispered something that made Officer Bennett slowly look up. Amanda's parents are going to kill me. I watched my son carefully, because in that moment, I realized something. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't worried about losing me. He was terrified of losing their approval. And that realization hit harder than anything he said yesterday. Then suddenly he looked up at me again, his voice shaking now. Dad, please tell me you didn't cancel the other thing too. I didn't answer. And when Daniel saw the look on my face, his knees nearly gave out. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. Dad, please tell me you didn't cancel the other thing too. I didn't answer. That was answer enough. His face twisted with panic. No, 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 no. He ran both hands through his hair, pacing across the driveway like a trapped animal. You can't do that, he said, his voice rising. You can't just pull everything out from under me overnight. I leaned against the truck. Feels sudden, doesn't it? He stopped pacing and pointed at me. This is my life. And yesterday you told me mine was a burden. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Daniel looked like he was about to explode. You're my father. You're supposed to help me, not destroy everything I built. I studied his face. You built it? He hesitated, just for a second. But that second told me everything. You helped, he muttered. I nodded slowly. I carried. He didn't respond. Officer Bennett stood quietly near the patrol car, letting the silence stretch. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice lower now. What did you cancel? I answered calmly. The lease. His head snapped up. What lease? The property lease for the garage building. Daniel's eyes widened. No. Yes. You can't. I own the land. His mouth opened, but no words came out. 5 years earlier, when Daniel started the repair shop, he couldn't afford a proper building. So I bought the old warehouse lot on the edge of town, signed the papers, put the lease in his name. I told him it was temporary, that someday the business would be strong enough to stand on its own. Daniel shook his head slowly. You wouldn't do that to me? I already did. The cold March wind blew across the driveway again. Daniel's voice cracked. Dad, if you cancel that lease, the shop has nowhere to operate. I know. My equipment is in that building. I know. My mechanics depend on those jobs. I know. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. This is cruel. I shook my head gently. No. Yes, it is. No, I said quietly. Cruel is telling the man who gave you everything that he's a burden. Daniel turned away and paced again. His shoulders were shaking now. Anger, panic, maybe both. Finally, he stopped and faced me again. You're doing this because Amanda's parents don't like you. I said nothing. They've been in my ear about you for months, he continued. They think you're too involved in our lives. I gave a small nod. I noticed. They said it wasn't healthy for a grown man to still rely on his father. That's probably true. Daniel looked confused. You agree with them? In a way. He stared at me. So that's what this is? What? You're trying to prove a point. I thought about that for a moment. Then I shook my head. No. Then what is it? I looked at the house behind him one last time. The porch where Linda used to drink coffee in the mornings. The window where Daniel pressed his face as a boy waiting for me to come home from work. Then I looked back at my son. This is me finally listening. Daniel frowned. To what? To the truth you told yesterday. His face tightened. Dad, you said I was a burden. I didn't mean, but you said it. He fell silent. I opened the driver's door of my truck. The old hinges creaked. Daniel's voice came out quieter now. Where are you going? I climbed into the seat. Somewhere I'm not unwanted. He stepped toward the truck. Dad, wait. I paused. He looked smaller somehow, not like the confident businessman he pretended to be. Just my boy again. Please, he said. For what? Don't do this. I studied him for a long moment. Then I asked one simple question. Daniel, if I hadn't taken everything away this morning. His eyes lifted slowly. Would you have come back to apologize? He didn't answer, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. I started the engine. The truck rumbled to life. Daniel stepped back slowly as I began to pull out of the driveway. But just as I reached the end of the street, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Amanda. And when I answered, the first thing she said made my hands tighten around the steering wheel. Robert, you need to come back. I frowned. Why? Her voice was shaking. Daniel just told me what you did. Yes. There was a long pause. Then she said something that made my stomach turn cold. You should know something. What? Her voice dropped to a whisper. My parents are already on their way to your house. I looked in the rearview mirror. Daniel was still standing in the driveway, alone. And suddenly I had the feeling this situation was about to get a whole lot worse. I turned the truck around before I even realized I was doing it. The engine growled as I drove back down the street toward the house. Daniel was still standing in the driveway when I pulled up again. He looked confused when he saw me return. You forgot something? He asked. I stepped out of the truck. Your wife called. His face tightened immediately. What did she say? Before I could answer, another car turned onto the street. A large silver SUV. Daniel didn't even have to look twice. That's them, he muttered. The SUV stopped hard in front of the house. The doors opened and Amanda's parents stepped out like they were arriving at a courtroom. Her father, Richard Collins, tall and stiff in his expensive coat. Her mother, Judith, already glaring toward the driveway. Richard walked straight toward Daniel first. What is going on? He demanded. Daniel rubbed his face. It's complicated. Richard didn't even look at me at first. Then his eyes shifted. Cold. So you're the one causing all this trouble? Officer Bennett stepped slightly forward. Sir, let's keep things calm. Richard ignored him and walked closer to me. You shut down Daniel's business this morning. I requested an inspection, I said. You pulled the funding. Yes. You canceled the lease. Yes. Judith scoffed loudly. Unbelievable. Richard shook his head slowly. I warned you about this, he said to Daniel. Your father has too much control over your life. Daniel looked miserable. Richard. But the older man wasn't finished. He turned back to me. You're sabotaging your own son because of a petty argument? I held his stare. You weren't there yesterday. I don't need to be. Daniel shifted nervously. Please, can we just talk about this? Richard raised his voice. No, this needs to be clear. He pointed directly at me. Well, you're trying to punish Daniel because he's building a life without you. The words hung in the cold air. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I said quietly, yesterday your son-in-law called me a burden. Richard barely blinked. Well, if we're being honest. Daniel turned quickly. Richard, stop. But the man continued anyway. You are living in his house. The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him. I studied Richard carefully. So that's what you believe? I believe grown men should stand on their own feet, Richard said. I nodded slowly. That's reasonable. Daniel frowned, confused. Then Judith crossed her arms. So what exactly do you want? She asked sharply. Nothing. Richard let out a short laugh. That's not true. I looked him in the eye. No, I already got what I needed. Daniel swallowed. What do you mean? I turned toward him. I finally heard the truth. The wind moved across the yard again. For the first time since they arrived. Richard looked slightly uncertain. What truth? I answered calmly. That my presence embarrasses you. Daniel looked down. I walked toward my truck again. Richard scoffed. So that's it? You destroy your son's business and just leave? I opened the door but paused. Then I said something that made Daniel slowly look up. I didn't destroy anything. Richard frowned. What are you talking about? I looked directly at Daniel. If your business collapses now, I paused, then it never belonged to you in the first place. No one spoke. Even Richard stayed quiet. I climbed back into the truck, but just before I closed the door, Daniel said something that stopped me cold. Dad! I looked at him. For the first time all morning, the anger was gone from his face. There was only fear. Please don't leave like this. The yard was completely silent. Officer Bennett leaned against his cruiser. Richard watched impatiently. Judith folded her arms. Daniel stood there, looking at me the way he used to when he was 10 years old and afraid of disappointing me. Then he said quietly, I was wrong. And for a moment, I didn't know whether it was already too late. The yard was completely silent. Daniel stood there looking at me, his shoulders slightly slumped, like the weight of everything had finally settled on him. I was wrong, he repeated. Richard scoffed beside him. Daniel, don't do this. But Daniel didn't look at him. He was looking at me. I shouldn't have said that, he continued, about you being a burden. The wind pushed a few dry leaves across the driveway. Judith rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Daniel's voice tightened. Mom, please. She fell quiet, though the irritation stayed on her face. I rested my hand on the truck door. Why now? I asked. Daniel swallowed. What do you mean? You said those words yesterday without thinking twice. His eyes dropped. And this morning you only started apologizing after everything started falling apart. He didn't argue. That silence said more than anything else could. Richard stepped forward again. This is ridiculous, he said sharply. Daniel doesn't need to grovel to anyone. Daniel turned toward him. I'm not groveling. You're acting like a child. I'm trying to fix something. Richard shook his head. What you need to fix is your dependence. Daniel didn't respond. For the first time since they arrived, he looked tired of listening. I watched him carefully. Then I said quietly, your shop isn't closed forever. Daniel looked up. What? The inspection will finish. He frowned. You canceled the lease. Yes. And the funding. Yes. His voice dropped. So what's left? I closed the truck door and leaned against it. What every business is supposed to stand on. Daniel looked confused. Which is? You. The words hung in the air. If that shop survives, I said, it will be because you fought for it, not because I carried it. Daniel stared at the ground. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Richard checked his watch impatiently. Finally, Daniel asked quietly, where will you go? I'll find somewhere. That's not an answer. It's enough. He nodded slowly. Judith sighed loudly. Well, this has been dramatic enough for one morning. Richard gestured toward the SUV. Daniel, come with us. You need to start fixing the real problems. Daniel didn't move. After a few seconds, Richard's patience wore thin. Daniel. Still nothing. Finally, Daniel spoke without looking at them. I'll handle it. Richard frowned. Handle what? My life. That answer seemed to irritate him even more, but he said nothing further. I climbed into the truck. The engine started with its usual rough rumble. Daniel stepped aside so I could pull out of the driveway. No one tried to stop me. Not Richard, not Judith, not even Daniel. As I drove away, I looked in the mirror once. Daniel was still standing there in the driveway, the house behind him, his in-laws near the street. and the morning wind moving through the quiet Cleveland neighborhood. Then the road curved, and the house disappeared from view. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. There's more to come.